What a privilege to be here. I have a cable, which is, if I fall over at any moment now, I trip over it. That might be the most memorable bit of my talk. I hope it's not the most memorable bit. I hope it's useful to you, but I will be walking around very oddly, as if I'm a hamster or a pet or something. So I have this thing. What I want to talk about relates to many of the issues that Judith Neilson spoke about. And I just want to imagine what a privilege it is to be here standing in front of you. I want to say that. It's a huge privilege, twofold, for be doing the third Utzon lecture in this series, and also to be doing the inaugural Judith Neilson lecture. So I'd like to talk about many of those issues that perhaps Judith touched on. I thought it might be helpful to give a subtitle to this title, Resilient Neighbourhoods, of course with a question mark behind it, because that's always the challenge. How resilient are we? And in a very simple level, challenges and opportunities in vulnerable places. And I wanted to put that because it's very easy when we talk about issues of poverties and disasters and forced migration and rapid urbanization to be very gloomy. I'm not glossing over, obviously these are serious issues, but it's real issues, not gloomy issues, and they're real issues. And the summary of what I'm going to say this evening is we have an opportunity to engage in that, to make a difference. But my contention is many of us in the built environment need to rethink how we do it. Now, you might disagree with me and push back, and that makes even more fabulous conversations because then the principles emerge. So I'm at the beginning of my story here, and I deliberately put my email on the front and on the back, and please let's be in touch. It's a sincere invitation. Okay, so challenges and opportunities. The first half are the challenges. I'm sorry if it feels gloomy, I don't mean it to be. The second half is the so what. What are the opportunities, okay? So please bear that in mind after 20 minutes. Okay, all right. What I want to start with are literally the last words that Johanni Plasma said at the end of the last Utzon lecture 3 weeks ago. In response to a question from the audience, the last words he said, and I was busy writing them down as he said them. You might remember, Helen, you were chairing that. The purpose of architecture is to provide us with the wholeness and dignity of human life. And it was a stunning lecture. The purpose of architecture, the wholeness and dignity. And I want to develop that theme of what architecture is. It's not buildings. And of course, those involved in this world know that wholeness and dignity. So please hold that thought. I'm going to come back to it, okay? And Lord, we really need that. We need to think about that in an age of rapid change. We're in a time now, these are the challenges, of unprecedented need. Now, this was a Guardian article just a week last Monday that came out. And I know, I don't apologize, actually, it sounds gloomy, but this is real. The world is heading for catastrophe over natural disasters, risk expert warns. And that's the new incoming fellow Glazer from the UN, if you like, the head of disasters for the United Nations. He's not wrong, but the word is heading for. This is not a certainty. This is not we've all had it. It's not a Hollywood movie. But the opportunities are there for us to do something about it. But that's the summary. So, of course, like any good academic, one tries to look at the evidence behind that. The best evidence we have right now in this very complicated world, and this is the only graph I will show you, I promise. And I'm sorry it's too much detail, but I couldn't find a simpler one. The summary is the red line of the number of disasters, so-called natural. And we can talk about how you count that. But please, the summary is they're going up. The bars relate to the cost in billions, adjusted for billions today. Did you know that urban flood is the most expensive kind of disaster in the world at the moment? Because it's there for a long time and ruins things. Mercifully, it kills less people because often floods are slower. Not always, but often. Something like 23 million people in Pakistan affected by floods 4 or 5 years ago. Who knew? The good news is not too many killed, but the damages. But then, of course, we get disasters such as Haiti, which kill tens of thousands of people, and I'll come back to that. But the summary is we're in a world where there are more disasters. Why? There is climate change. That is a fact. Sea level rises. The effect on wind-related storms means stronger storms. However, it's actually a peculiar success. It's because there are so many people on the planet. The very good news is less people are dying, and we're in this demographic shift where we're growing. We're 7.5 billion, 7.3 will be something like 9.5. So there are more vulnerable people on the planet. And that means there's opportunity. It's not to do with the naturalness of a disaster. We can do things about it. Okay? Now, as we know, another very big need at the moment, I'm really going to watch this, relates to forced migration around the world. And this is an extraordinary story. And I know I'm new to Australia, so I'm not aware of the politics and, of course, the sensitivities. But as you know, this is the biggest shift since World War II. And one example of that, because there's South Sudan, there's Ukraine, there are other countries around the world where this is happening, has been going on for decades, relates to, of course, the horrendous nightmare that is Syria. And something like 4 million people have been shifted out, have fled. Something like 7 million have shifted internally, if you like, internal refugees, if you like, people who have had to shift. Those people, where have they gone? Well, Jordan, the neighboring countries, of course, as we know, have been extraordinary in taking in people, extraordinary. One example would be Jordan. Zaatari refugee camp is a very famous camp. There was nothing there pretty much by 2012. Now something like 85,000 people. But you might be surprised, as I was when I saw this and went there, that 4/5 of refugees are actually living in the city. 4/5 of people are not in refugee camps, but have actually shifted to be more anonymous, to get job opportunities, to struggle if you like, but many would say it's arguably less the worst than being in a refugee camp to be in the city, knowing how hard this is. So two things I want to develop here. One is we have an aid system largely set up for this, and the second reality where 4/5 of people are dispersed in a city in the built environment, in the world, if you like, of the built environment, which is the tie-in to, in fact, the Judith Neilson thinking. So we have new challenges, okay? Excuse me for a quick plug. Tomorrow night, let me jump to that. If you're interested in this subject, we have a Q&A on urban migration and crises in the Law Theatre. Please come, it's free, and we have 5 extremely talented and experienced people who are going to take part of a Q&A. You can find it online, but please come if you're not signed up. I'll tell you who's coming later, but it's going to be a very, very interesting talk. This was such a big subject, we made it a separate subject, okay, because it's such a big one right now. Okay, back to the conversation, the unfolding need we have right now. This report came out 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, something like that, from a think tank called the Overseas Development Institute, who have been one of the world's leading think tanks on aid and development for decades. They came out with this report called Time to Let Go. And in the world of humanitarian aid, a bit of a bombshell. Oh my goodness, based on serious research around the world, thousands of interviews, all the rest, not just polemic or, let's just knock the aid people like many do. This is serious, and they're saying time to let go, time to rethink the aid world because it's not fit for purpose. Not fit for purpose. We have so much need. We have an aid system that's not changed largely since World War II, since 1945. It's really not changed very much. We deliver large amounts of stuff, and when I mean we, it's often people in the richer countries of the world delivering to poorer countries. It's not like that anymore. The game has shifted, and the needs are profoundly different. And so the argument of this report, which I think many of those and us involved in this would completely agree with, are these issues, very slow to adapt. This is freely available. Please look it up. Slow to adapt, one reason, again, building on the idea of the built environment, relates to an aid system that was based on a rural thinking. We talk about field work. We talk about an assumption of working in a beautiful village, in fact, such as this in northern Zimbabwe. Okay, a beautiful village. So an aid system that may assume that there's a community where people know each other, that it's around food that you deliver, that it's around people will recover and they'll be okay now. And as probably almost all of us in this audience know, we're in an urban world, and this is just down the road in Johannesburg. And for those who know Joburg, this is a very famous big settlement. This is the new reality of the urban world, and a challenge that the aid system and others, because now the point is it's no longer the aid system, it's others being involved in this, need to work together with to deal with the crisis coming with us, because it's an urban crisis that we're facing. And again, I'm very aware how gloomy I sound, okay? I'm coming on to the so whats. But we are in an urban world. I mean, take a view whether you think that's good or bad. I think there's a million positive things about an urban world. However, the figures are startling, and I surprise myself whenever you see this. The best estimate from the UN is that cities are growing by about 1 million people a week, more or less 180,000 people a day. I don't know about you, but my jaw drops. Goodness me. And that's actually not people moving to the cities, but that's significant. But it's people being born in cities. They haven't come from anywhere. So planning policies relating to stemming migration, forget it. 9/10 of growth are in cities. They're not coming from anywhere, all right? This is an urban world which is growing by 1 million people a week. That's challenges. And cities expanding, of course, and swallowing up and all that kind of stuff. It's complicated. This is Shimla, by the way, in northern India, a beautiful city. I'm sure many people have been there. Watch out. Earthquakes are overdue in that region, and my good friend and colleague Anshu Sharma speaks about this a lot. It's about the risk of earthquake in these parts of the world, which are frequent. million people a week, something like just under 1 billion people right now live in informal settlements. And choose your word, we had a great conversation today. Do we use the word slum? That's pejorative, isn't it? Or squatter settlement, even more offensive. Are you from a squatter settlement? Feels uncomfortable. People living in poverty in places that are denser and unpleasant with water and sanitation that doesn't work, and yet people doing remarkable things in those worlds to survive, often in the face of formality. That's going to grow maybe to 60% by 2050. Who knows? Those are the best guesses we have. Those figures are about 3-4 years old from UN Habitat and other United Nations bits. So we're in an urban world. That's an opportunity for people working in this area. So in summary, this is the first bit of what I wanted to say. In summary, we have an urban world with severe challenges, also opportunities, but severe challenges, okay? And an outdated system. Now, I tried to avoid a Venn diagram there. The tendency is a Venn diagram. Okay, but I tried to avoid it and to say these are 3 big things. So the question I want to ask now, because it's an Utzon lecture and a lot of us are architects and architects by training, and there's an interesting built environment, is what role for architects, planners, and urban designers? Now, the summary is it's huge, but my argument is it needs to change really quite profoundly. We need to use the inherent skills that are taught in architecture school and education, embrace the qualities of architecture, but we do need to do it differently. And I think that's an opportunity. And to try and unpack this a little bit, I just want to turn to a personal story, because I'm hoping that illustrates it the best. So I went to architecture school and I was 19 and I fell in love with architecture. I mean that when I say that. The world of the built environment and the theory and the stuff absolutely lit up and to play a role in this. And I'm afraid I was at an architecture school in England where you're taught to be omnipotent. You are taught to design the product, present it, the crit system which says, here it is, and if you don't like it, it's because you're wrong, because I am the designer, and I am taught to prove why I'm right in a system that does that. And I think that's wrong. Obviously, you might think I might think that. But that was my training, and along with people in my cohort, this was a long time ago in the 1980s. And I then got involved in this world after working a bit. I went back to school, architecture school, and we had a visitor, a professor from MIT, Reinhard Goethert, and I asked him with great excitement, what's the role of the architect in this world of things? And he said marginal at best. 1991, and 1991, he said marginal at best, and that was like a bombshell, because I saw my world being this thing, okay? Marginal at best. So I charged off and got involved in aid work and did lots of stuff and different things. And about 14 years later, returned through a series of events to architecture school back in the UK at the same place. In fact, it had now become Oxford Brookes University. It's Oxford Poly. And I became director of a centre which related to developments and emergencies and the practice and what do you do. And it was a multidisciplinary course with lots of architects, fantastic. And I thought I would write a piece for The Guardian, an opinion piece, and I'd be very carefully nuancing what it says, that the role of architecture is the process, the engagement, stuff that's been around for decades. I mean, this is not new, you know, and I relate to some people doing that. Not new, relating the process and the involvement and the engagement. And I proudly sent that off to The Guardian without the headline. You see what's coming. And they printed the headline, and I saw it the following day. And that was the headline, that architects are the last people needed in disaster reconstruction. And you can imagine the frosty atmosphere in the biggest school in the country in the UK, sitting with my line manager, the head of the school. I didn't say that. I promise you what I thought was a carefully crafted and nuanced piece. And so I died on the inside, and nobody talked to me. I'm not kidding. And I tell you now, I got the horrible emails. Some strange man in America set up a website about how wrong, and you know that kind of thing, you're trolling kind of thing. It was, I'm not kidding actually, it was actually very unpleasant. So anyway, I mean, this was a small piece, who cares? Well, apparently. Anyway, so I reflected on this, by the way, and I thought not to put this up, but you know what? I am so pleased that that person put that up, that summary, because I think that that's the kickoff, and I would stand by that now. Professor of Architecture. I would stand by that now, but I do come back to, I think there are opportunities, but I would like to unpack why, and I'd like to share 3 reasons with you, and I'm being slightly polemical, but it's evidence-based, and I think those things, and I could back it up all night if you care to chat later. But 3 reasons. The first relates to this one, and you might be surprised by these 3 things. The first relates to this one. This statement by Tom Pritzker, the Pritzker Prize, from 2014, and he said this when the award was given to Shigeru Ban for his humanitarian architecture. I'm sure we all know Shigeru Ban. Innovation is not limited by building type, and compassion is not limited by budget. I wish that was true. And I'm sure everybody else wishes that was true. Compassion is limited by budget. Okay, that's my first point. There is a price on compassion. I'm sorry to say, we do not have enough money for the response to the disasters that happen right now. It is not a simple choice that there is no price. And for my proof for that, there are many metrics, just one. This is the amount of funding excuse me, relating to the United Nations calls over the last 10 years, more or less. The yellow is what was got. These are in billions of dollars. The black is what was not reached. So that is an underfunded Haiti. Now, we can discuss misused aid. I get that. I get that conversation. At this point here, this is talking about the price of compassion. And so you can see, it doesn't take rocket science to see that. Okay, it's one metric. Okay, it's not the only one. Okay, my argument here is you can choose, and this is always the tension and the debate in relief and recovery operations, do you go wide and thin and reach as many people as you can, or do you go thin and deep? And you can go thin and deep, and you can design a beautiful set of buildings, and I have seen them and evaluated them, that reach 50 families in a place where 3 million people are homeless. You can then put that on TV. You can then say, there it is. And that is not helpful. I'm sorry, I feel slightly emotional at that, because that too often you get that. Because we have a TV culture of disasters, that's okay. And I won't name agencies, and there are many who think that's okay. It's not okay. That's an abuse of funds. So there is a price in compassion, okay? I am sorry to say, I'm sure you agree with me. Who would want that? Just on that, by the way, I took a bit of a poke around. I was at the Australian Institute of Architects last week. 1,100 people. I mean, it was a fantastic conference. And in prep for that, for a little bit of a talk I gave there too, I looked up the Venice Biennale. You're all aware the Venice Biennale, not the Australian one. The Venice one taking place this May, which is taking... Oh, I might do something wrong there. But taking place in Italy, Europe, small people, history. Britain's over there. Okay, Italy. Italy's here. And the Venice Biennale, obviously in Venice. And the Biennale this year is on reporting from the front. And that takes place in May. Many of you may be going to that. And reading about it, I was excited last year when the intent of the Chilean architect, Alejandro Ayarena, who's you all know him, I'm sure. The idea of architecture and civil society, bringing the two together, because as we know, there is a big gulf between architecture and civil society, and how we combine those two worlds. And that is a great big challenge. And this is the poster of this woman here. And I read the website, so I read parts of it as well. This is a quote from the president of the Biennale, and I'll just read it out because, I'm developing themes and readings here. What does the lady see? Mainly desolated land comprising immense swathes of human habitation which no human could be proud of. Great disappointments representing a sad infinite number of missed opportunities for humanity's ability to act intelligently. It's a woman up a stepladder in the desert, and I find that really depressing. I say that as someone who's proud of my training and background. I don't think that's a good advert. I'm sorry if some people I'm offending, but I think the point of our hope of our future is far more powerful than that. And one can only hope, there are going to be some very great things going on there. But I find that difficult. What I would propose to do is actually go a few days earlier, if you can, and go to Turkey and attend, if you can, the World Humanitarian Summit. Our world is made up of worlds, different parallel worlds talking. This is the first time the world is coming together to discuss the reality of humanitarian aid and innovation, resilience, urban, all the things that need to be done. Several thousand people are going. Governments of the world have got together to discuss, United Nations, everybody else, the bank. There are lots of problems. There are several flaws. I'm extremely aware of that. We could discuss that. But I think, you might think I'm just looking at images and all that, and maybe I am. But actually, I would go to that. I would go to what we could do to actually make a difference where we go thin and wide as opposed to the building of the product. Because my interest is of the people of it, and that's the point of this. And one can only hope the Biennale is actually very strong about people-oriented design, and no doubt the good bits of that will be that, about what it matters to have this rapid need and rapid urbanization. And that's the challenge in our world right now. So please go to Italy, and please go beforehand to Turkey. And it's a beautiful trip. You can go via Greece on the ferry, and everybody wins. Okay? All right. This is the first time ever the world has come together to discuss these issues, okay? That's interesting, don't you think? The second one I would talk about, and I'm going to spend half this talking about opportunities. Okay. All right, I'm going to call it that. I'm going to call it the form fetish. At the AIA conference in Adelaide, those who were there will have seen Kevin Lowe speak from Malaysia. Absolutely stunning talk. And Kevin Lowe talked about talked about form, the beauty of form, beautiful form. And then he contrasted that with content. You can do both, I know. But he then talks about content, the difference between form and content. And I'd like to say that the risk of thinking of form only is at the expense of content, when it's people and doing and economics and politics and all those things. And we can fall into traps. I'm only going to share a couple of slides with you, okay? I used to work in a disaster management consultancy, and we would get contacted a lot by people who would say, and well-meaning, I mean, please don't think, that the answer to a disaster and a relief is actually containers. And shipping containers are things that can be fitted in order to actually have people live in. It's extremely expensive to do, okay? It's unaffordable. I'm sure you can all think of high-end hotels, and I can think of those in the sushi bar in Harvard Square, which is a very nice container. We can do that. We can design that. But it's not the point. It costs too much. That's a summary of a long conversation. This is a competition. I want to focus a little bit. The opportunity of competitions is there. The risk is it stays image-based. And this was an Innovation Fund proposal that made it to a shortlist. It's called the Jellyfish Barge. The idea in no more than 20 seconds, after a disaster near water, rubbish is compacted to make a big floating platform. You put a hole in it. You build a geodesic dome on. You then get water to, and you do stuff and you feed plants and everyone's fine. I mean, it's absurd. And the beauty and the drawings are beautiful. And I say that. I mean, they are seductive. I was seduced. You were that. You were on the panel. They're seduced. They're beautiful. The seduction, and I confess to that. That's not the point. The content is the point. And this one, which is an extremity, but a real one, which are eggs for Haiti from a design competition in an architectural school elsewhere, where somebody who I assume is not a dummy, because they're not, but just misled about what the point is. This, you can see the map perhaps of Port-au-Prince just after the earthquake, and the idea is you float an egg above the ministry to which government provided the most money. Now, I'm sure everybody here thinks that's completely ridiculous. But this is a well-intended design, I assume, where someone spent a lot of time rendering. And it's just... Okay, so let's jump to real Haiti, okay? Real Haiti earthquake, the story is awful. Already the poorest country in the Western world. Between 90,000 and 316,000 people died. Because the country is in so much struggle, no one really knows. It's in that range. No one knows. How can you not know how many hundreds of thousands of people have died? That's the level of poverty in Haiti. Several years later, this is how it was. Now, you may remember after the Haiti earthquake, there was a design competition in order to generate ideas. Fine. I have no problem with that. Please don't think I am critiquing the idea of ideas generation for post-disaster reconstruction. It's a fine idea if you get good designs or the recognition of good designs. The risk is when it's form, not content. That's the argument I'm proposing. This was just north of Port-au-Prince in an area called Orange, and many phones put in, and these buildings were built. Well, a few of us went back there 2 years ago to revisit the expo. This is the expo site. This is one of the buildings. This is another one. This is another one. There's always a dome after a disaster. There's a book, Dome After Disaster, because it feels logistical and emergency. There's something about it, okay? And that's the dome leaking. Who knew? Domes leak. There it is. The best thing about this is that this site now, people have moved in, informally, squatters, people might say. The only good news about this is people are living in them. And that's the good news, because I am not aware of this ever being adopted by anybody anywhere. Maybe you know of the odd one that was. But this has no resonance when it comes to the realities of the dense city that's Port-au-Prince. I like it. I like that design. I mean, don't get me wrong. But it's meaningless. It has no meaning when it comes to post-disaster recovery. Okay, too much focus on relief. Again, that might sound absolutely counterintuitive. Of course, after a disaster, you need support. You need help. Obviously, that's the definition of disaster. You're overwhelmed. However, the risk is you create dependency. And this well-known phrase, relief is the enemy of recovery. You give relief for too long, you create dependency. It can last for decades. And I'm not exaggerating. Too much relief causes dependence, okay? And that is why, you might think this sounds odd, that for many people doing this kind of business, this is far better than that. So what do I critique that on? I critique that on the idea that tarpaulins, you can stack, you can fly, they cost very little, they can be used an infinite number of ways. This incredibly good tent, and I lived in Norway, I know this Norwegian tent, cost something like $900, something like that, and probably the same again to ship, okay? and it's a beautiful tent, but you can't do anything with that tent. And then the money you spent in that, this is Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan, you could have built 3 houses employing local people with local materials and had money to share, and you get a veranda. So which is better, okay? This is true, this is all true. What is better? Obviously, it's the second one. But this is the age system we're in, where relief, I mean, I'm not knocking goodwill, you know I'm not, right? It's because it's serious business. It's about how you use that money to the best effect you possibly can, and that's the challenge that we often don't think about when we have that. Okay, all right, and then my final sort of one, I think it is, and just to back that up, Deborah Sontag, New York Times 2013, at that time, of the billions spent, something like that for permanent housing, something like that by short-term solutions. This, in fact, is Central Port-au-Prince. This is not an urban form. This is a shed for a garden. That's not an urban form, and that's not real, but that was real in Central Port-au-Prince in December 2010. And I'm sorry to say, we were talking about this today. This is Nepal. And you may have seen the news last week, the 1-year anniversary in Nepal. This is a house a few of us came across. This is not unusual, it's a row. You know what? It's very hot in the summer, and it's very cold in the winter, and it's extremely noisy when it rains, and it looks beautiful on a drawing. Sign me up. You know, I hope that's not a cheap comment, but my point is about what you really do with this stuff and what really matters. And I'm sorry if that sounded a bit cheap, it probably was, because it needs to be better than that. But we know the bad news coming out of Haiti, that actually for many years people are going to be living these things, and the overwhelming majority of people will get nothing at all. So it's thin along as opposed to that, and that's our challenge. Okay, all right. Okay, so in summary, okay, this is a drawing. We mentioned St. Canis. This is a drawing from one of our students, which I'm going to come to soon. The summary I would suggest, I would argue, we focus a lot on the surface. And when I say we, I mean a lot of those involved in the aid world and a lot of well-meaning intent, okay? All right, we focus a lot on what's above the surface, but what's beneath the surface, guess what? It's super complicated and hard, but if we do not think about that, or at least consider it, then we're doomed to fall apart and we're doomed to crash. I used to put an iceberg up, and then the analogy is a rather obvious one. But this is a much more beautiful drawing about the complexity. Now, you might say that's outside the remit of what we deliver. And my pushback would be, well, that's the problem with our delivery, because the demand is actually about these issues. And we separate this from emergencies and development, but true engagement has the two together, and it's hard and complicated. So what I would like to do is to then spend the second half now talking about those issues, okay? Having tried to set that up. Okay. All right, so opportunities, there are millions. Okay, but what I would like to do is to start by, of course, this is the inaugural Judith Neilson lecture based on the endowments that Judith Neilson has made, an extraordinarily generous endowment for this university to try and work on these issues. And I hope you don't mind putting this up, Alec. So Judith Neilson with Emeritus Professor Alex Zarnes, who was instrumental as our former dean in terms of putting this together and making this happen. And this is a quote when the endowment was formally announced, from Judith. Through architecture and design, we can in some way restore safety, dignity, and hope to some of the world's most vulnerable people. We're talking about socially transformative design and bringing about policy change. So I put that up after what I've just been saying, and I feel very comfortable, because Judith Neilson is talking about safety, dignity, hope, socially transformative. So we do need to question the things that we've done. We do need to learn from other worlds and think about that. That's the mandate for this chair. And that's what we'll be doing. And just as a part of what we've been doing, in fact today, not by coincidence, today, tomorrow, the day after, I just want to share this, we have a group of 10 of us, 4 people from abroad and 5 or 6 people from here, scratching our heads thinking about what to do, all extremely experienced people. So this is us. The picture's poor because it's my camera today, my phone. So Viv Waters has been leading us through improv, actually, creative design. The point I want to make is that these are people from all different backgrounds. So we have architects and we have planners. We have Beck Dawson, the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Sydney, along with Paul Currian, an aid worker based in Serbia doing extraordinary things, along with Brad Ferber from the Innovation Centre here. And we're alongside Anshu Sharma from India, Gerald Caden from Harvard, thinking about what do we do about this. Now this is just 4 hours in. I'm not asking you to read this. My point in putting this up is that everybody there is fully engaged in the complexity, and we're not saying we need a better shed, we need to do this bit. It's systemic because of the mandate we have, and the opportunities are strong about what we do. It's a position of hope Tomorrow, day after, we'll do that. We'll see where it goes. The bottom red ones are the knotty challenges. We're not naive to that, but we're thinking, what can we do? Okay? And that's what we're doing right now. I just want to share that with you. Okay. And our 3 keywords, urban, design, and humanitarian. Avoiding the Venn, but if I was to draw a Venn diagram, what are those various overlaps? That's what we're trying to do, knowing this is the beginning of a long story. Okay, all right. What I would like to argue are some things like this, and for want of a better phrase, I want to call it an architectural relevance. I am not saying, and sign me up to beautiful, I'm not saying irrelevant other stuff. I'm talking about this specific humanitarian world of great need. That's what I'm talking about. The opportunity is that. I would argue it's process and product, if you like. It's the product, we make great architecture, but we engage meaningfully in these things. I am not saying retrain as an economist or a social scientist, but I am saying we engage in those things in meaningful ways. And I'd like to explore that a little bit more. And again, I would like to come back to Pelasma's quote, actually, to remind, I think, this position I'm taking, wholeness and dignity. And then Judith Neilson's words, safety, dignity, hope, and transformative design. That's what we can do. Okay, some more thoughts on that. What I feel comfortable about now, however, is that I feel very comfortable on the architectural scheme of things, because I think, and would argue, good architecture is always challenged, always rethought, and always rethinks. And it might be a surprise to see Le Corbusier popping up. And I remember reading this in architecture school and being so excited about the idea that you learn that industrialization and industrial shift provides cathedrals that we can learn from. What you might see and think is ugly is beautiful because of what it does. And now, obviously, this is architectural mainstream of form and function and all those things. We might jump to learning from Las Vegas, Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi, who went to a place that many would say would be tacky and a bit grotesque, and say, what do we learn from it? What are the things we can take from it around making great design that's relevant? And that's really interesting. And then also the great Jane Jacobs, who talked about the death and life of great American cities, who really made us rethink in the States, but I think the knock-on was profound, about thinking about how we see things, about how we see it and how we rethink it. Now, these are quite old, okay, but what game changers they have been. Now, I'm not putting this up. This is the Yitsky River in Johannesburg. I'm not putting this up as some kind of pastiche to romanticize poverty. I'm not doing that. I'm just putting this up by saying this is an urban reality for many. How do we engage and what does it mean to think about those things now? That's an urban opportunity. I'd like to talk about some game changers, and golly, there are many game changers relating to our world. Architects who have spent careers doing this. I've said a lot of what I've said is not new. All right, it's not new, but actually we need to remember these things. One would be John Turner, who coined the phrase housing as a verb. We think about what a house does for you as well as what it is, okay? And of course, in the words of Aravena, he talks about nouns and verbs. You know, the language follows on to today about how we see those things. So the echoes are there. This man changed how we think about these things 40 years ago in terms of aid and delivery, not seeing slums as terrible things, but as actually industry and people working incredibly hard in the face of the formal system. That was a game changer. I put up Nabil Handy, who talks about flexibility and enablement, who coined this curious phrase, housing without houses, based on other things. If the solution to housing is not to build houses, what is that? How do we engage people and what do we do? And he's spent a career doing those things and has written many books on that stuff. And I would like to put up, of course, Paul Folleras, who I never met, of course, but who, as you well know, very sadly died not that long ago, a great loss. Somebody who talked about health and engaging the realities of marginalized communities and how they're part of the design process and did extraordinary things. So these people have been around doing these things, of course, for a long time. My argument is this needs to be mainstream for the humanitarian side of things. Some of the true designers I would just say here, and of course, you know, a million pictures. This is the Bang Bua Canal in Bangkok, which suffers floods all the time. The 2011 floods were particularly bad. For months, people were living. My raising this picture to you now is not to say, oh no, this is all, you know, to be romanticized. It's actually about the washing. It's the washing line. People are just getting on with life by putting out the washing, going to work, living a life, raising children, school, healthcare. This is real life, as we know, for lots of people. Often, not always, actually this is a notable exception, often what happens when, of course, such communities meet formality is often thrown off, and forced evictions are one of the problems. Eviction is an issue, relocation planning, yes. Forced eviction, often illegal in many countries around the world, illegally put into place, and there are endless stories on that. Or this is after Typhoon Haiyan in Tacloban. You remember that especially severe typhoon, the washing's out. People are living in that ship. 7 ships were lifted up and put there. What do people do in the months or the years before there's a return to normalcy? And the Philippines has been extraordinary in its ability to recover. I'm not putting this up going, oh, I'm putting this up saying people are resilient and get on with life in spite of this and go back to work. And the day after the Haiti earthquake, the markets were opening in Port-au-Prince because people do those things. People are personally resilient. Often, not always, of course, and that's when we get problems. Or this settlement, for 30 years, people lived in Delhi, in this area. 30 years, that's generational and often longer than an awful lot of buildings that gets designed. That's not temporary. That's not a temporary settlement, that's 30 years. They were subject to fires and collapse and floods and all kinds of things. Managed to survive because it's close to work and all those conversations. I would argue that's a form of resilience that's very powerful, that all of us can learn from. And finally, this woman after the Gujarat earthquake, this is her shop, this is where she sells, this is where her family is fed, these are all goods, this is what she owns, these are those things, this is the building she does those things from. There's something about that, and of course, we can learn from what's around us that informs how we do things. Okay. And the good news about Haiti, and there's a lot of good news about Haiti, in Canaan, which is an informal settlement, not a planned settlement after the earthquake, not the famous Camp Karai, but the area next to Camp Karai. In 2009, nothing there. The earthquake, 2010. This was soon after 2011, 2013, 3 years later, dense. Okay, something like $100 million of people's money was spent. People living in squatter settlements, living in bad locations, people who said, aha, I see the opportunity to relocate, to get my own land, to do something. And so we have a settlement here. Any NGO would that would be the manner, $100 million of people's own money to do something and take control. Any good NGO would want that to be that, okay? This is powerful stuff. People are doing it in spite. Now, I'm not, again, romanticizing. There are issues, there are problems, but that's a powerful story. And I know people involved in this world who are living in Haiti just to untrack this, you know, because it's so powerful, and that offers us lots of pointers about people's agency, okay, if you like. And just on that, a wider language. We have these issues, these challenges, these needs we've talked about. Here at UNSW, we're talking about social agency, this idea of agency, of personal freedom. And in a social setting, what does that mean? What does an architecture of social agency mean? Maybe it's engaging with other worlds and being cross-disciplinary. And I could go on all day with these bubbles, so that question mark is the last one, because we don't know what it is yet. But it's engaging, it's an opportunity for a richer design based on a wider world. Okay? And describing great architecture, I'd like to propose this, in addition to commodity, delight, firmness. I had tried to memorize that so hard. Commodity, firmness, and I knew I was going to slip on that. Thank you so much. Okay, these look as dull as ditch water, but these have been around 15 years in the aid world, and actually they relate to actions of an organization for people. How efficient was it? How relevant was it to life? What was the impact 20 years on? How effective? How sustainable? Now, I know we use these words. I'm not proposing they're brand new, but I'm just thinking, what's your metric of what makes for an aesthetic which is powerful? It's form, yes. It's content, yes. It's many things, and it's these two. I'm not suggesting we don't do it yet, but I'm saying these things make for what makes for great architecture. I would argue that. Okay, embrace resilience. Obviously, we're going to talk about resilience. Of course, sign me up. My other half just finished a PhD in urban resilience. We've ate and slept and breathed resilience for 3 years now. Hallelujah. It's over. But it's not just that. Of course, that was evidence-based. But the evidence is that resilience, is there, and it's a good word. And it's almost certainly here to stay. We're going to hear think about Rockefeller and resilience stuff, UN Habitat, others. The Sustainable Development Goals that are taken over from the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, 2 of them relate to resilience in our built environment. So they're here till at least 2030. I don't know what you think. I think it's a great word. It brings together worlds. I mean, it's great. And I could talk, in fact, I took several slides out because I would bore you about why resilience is great. But I think one of the summary is it comes from many backgrounds. We know it comes from engineering, okay? It's an engineering term about a bridge bouncing back. It comes from psychology, if you like, as well, about a resilient soul, about, mental health. It certainly comes from ecology, would you say? About plants, about bending. So bounce back, bounce forward, bounce up and down, do many things. It's about bouncing, withstanding. All of us here have an understanding what resilience is. I bet you we all do. Less would have what livelihoods means. Disaster mitigation and preparedness. By the time we've defined it, we've all got bored. But we understand this word because it's a politically uniting word. And that's the strength of it. You get the politicians to sign up to resilience in the same way they would not sign up to the word vulnerability. Vulnerability, vote for me. No, resilience, vote for me. And I say, I mean it seriously. Resilience, vote for me. Yes, and I mean that without cynicism. That's a powerful word. It's probably here to stay. Okay, what designers can learn from, this is a this is a naked self-publication promotion of a book that I was lucky enough to be involved in the editing along with Gerald Caden over here. And we held a conference 2 years ago today, actually, in the States at Harvard, at Gerald's University. 140 people, almost all from the design world. And we said, what does it mean to do design for urban disaster? And it was a struggle. And our book came out, and it was a struggle about finding what's the design for that. And there's rebuild by design. There are many things. Of course there are. What we, in the end, came out with was 12 or 14 chapters under some of these key words, the chapter subheadings, if you like. So our contributors from all over the world talked about systems and people and markets, regulations, cities, technology, environmentalized planning, insurance, design, places. Many of whom are architects and planners, proudly, of course, and engaging in these other words, of course. Really interesting. So our book, which came out last week, available at all good bookshops, very modestly priced. Actually, not modestly priced at all, don't buy it. Okay, but it's an absolute racket. But there it is. Don't film that. And so there's a lot on resilience and a lot more. But my point is for design, of course it is. And my last 2 or 3 slides, touching on the beginning of our story here at UNSW, relating to social agency. This was, I just put this up because this was a really very small article that Fran Strachan from our faculty put out. The Sunday Telegraph, I'm from the UK, and the Sunday Telegraph is very highbrow, very everything, and I understand it's different here. I didn't think you'd laugh so much because I had never seen it. But I am so proud it's in the Sunday Telegraph. If it's the same as our Sunday papers in the UK, sign me up, because of course that's exactly where social agency architecture should be, right? You can see what I'm saying here. It's exactly where it should be, okay? And just one quote from that. The point is, what does it take to be relevant in that world, don't get me wrong, in the next 20 or 30 years, because it will change, okay? And we have the opportunity. So how happy in the Sunday Telegraph? Okay, and then just finally on the studio, which I think you kindly mentioned, Helen, Father Chris from St. Canice, thank you for being here. St. Canice Church in Roslyn Street in King's Cross has agreed to host 18 of us for a year to try and work out what this means. And that's the title of our studio, Resilient City, Resilient Neighbourhood. So it's the, if you like, the strategic of the city, if you like, and also the practical, if you like, and I know those overlap, about a church which is vibrant and has refugee services, people who drop in, a garden that feeds an awful lot of people, that provides food for thousands of people a year, something like that, that does an incredible amount of stuff relating to, if you like, resilience. So we're fortunate enough to spend a year there. We meet there once a week, our final year students, and we're thinking about some of these things, sharing what's working, preparedness, association. I could put up a million images, and I won't because time is short, okay? But just what I thought might be trying the essence of it, okay? Okay, so what to do? We built a model. Our studio is in the basement of the church, which is naturally lit because the church goes down like that. We built a model. We did not build a precious model, and people have been doing this for decades. A rough and ready model that kids can move or whatever. We're not quite sure what we're going to do with it yet, but actually it's been a bit of a galvanizer for people to come and look at and see and say, so what? We had a meeting there last week, about a week ago, where Father Chris kindly hosted us. And this photo is deliberate because it's around soup and it's around food. And it's around social interaction, of course it is. And this was an evening where anybody could come. You can see the remarkably beautiful images of several of our students. I think it's Ryan and Christine and others, and Michael's just around here, doing extraordinary thoughts around thinking, what does it mean? We're not jumping into designing the product. It's spend a lot of time listening, do stuff, watch. I mean, shut up and listen is overstating it, but it's not far off that. What does it mean here? How can we possibly know anything? Okay, but I just want to share, this is pretty much my last image, just one. I could have shared dozens of images, but just this one, because I think it's provocative, from one of our people on the course, Tim Smith. And what I'm showing here, and I know it looks anarchic, good, it's somebody exploring about what the issues are and the complexity of the city, not a simple design, the complexity of the city. But this relates straight back to Paul Folleros's thinking about health habitat. He's actually been looking at the principles of health habitat and engaging with those things and saying, what does it mean to talk about shelter, trauma, wash meaning bathrooms and washing and stuff like that, and food, and animal meaning people having pets and things. And you might think, what's that got to do with architecture and architects? But of course, this is the urban environment. Urban engagers need to have this engagement. Don't have to profoundly change who you are, but actually to be part of this story. And Tim and the others, I think, are going through a process of learning and trying to grab it. So we'll see where that goes. So that was my pretty much There's always one more slide. So the very final slide, actually, very final slide, take time to listen. And this phrase that's been around, certainly in the aid world for 20 years or more, whose reality counts? The parting shot is, whose reality counts? Does it really matter what I think? Almost certainly not. But does it matter here or in London or in, I don't know, Dhaka in Bangladesh? Whose reality counts? And that's the challenge about good design, to actually consider whose reality counts when designing. And that's it. I'm going to hope.